So we continue this morning in our exploration of Peter's letter to Christians in the last decade of the first century. Written to a people who made a decision to follow Jesus at a time when it was not popularly accepted and resulted in, at the very least, friction with family, friends, and neighbors, as Michael aptly pointed out in his sermon last week, and at worst, persecution. In the section of the letter that we heard today, Peter continues to encourage his friends in Christ to trust that this new road that they're traveling is worthwhile. And he does this by reminding them of three things. They don't have to stay living in the way that it was. They can trust and hope in God always. And love is key. Peter writes, "You know that you were ransomed from the futile conduct inherited from your ancestors." We are connected to the people who came before us. Their ideas and actions, systems and structures having shaped both who we ourselves are and how the world around us operates. And we're not only connected to and impacted by the good, we're connected to and impacted by the struggle and the pain and the harm of the past. Very appropriate timing. And while there can be much to celebrate and hold up, there's also plenty to re-examine, to think about critically, and to amend. And Peter's encouraging this. He's encouraging this precisely because of the death and resurrection of Jesus, which shows us that new life is always possible and always unfolding. Only participating in new life will almost always take us out of our comfort zone. For the original recipients of Peter's letter, it meant adopting an expression of faith that invited them to live lives that were radically different than what they'd always known and what the world around them expected. I wonder, what does this look like for us? We're living in a time and a place where being a follower of Jesus in our Western culture seems as confusing as it has for some time. On the one hand, we have this history of the institutional church deeply intertwined with colonialism. And on the other hand, the din of Christian nationalism and prosperity gospel at play for years is getting louder and louder. We're in this place where there's plenty to re-examine, to think about critically and amend when it comes to what following Jesus looks like today. And to do that well, we engage in what a mentor of mine called remembering forward. We remember all the way back. We root ourselves in the way of Jesus, while at the same time we remember all the way forward to the promise given to us that the future is unperishable, that it is filled with goodness and peace, and we do our very best to live as though this has already come into being, because we don't have to stay living in the way that it was. We aren't bound to the conduct inherited from our ancestors, even when the conduct was purported as the way of Jesus. Because if there's one thing that we at St. Clement's know, the learning part of following Jesus is ongoing. Thankfully, this ongoing learning is rooted in trust and hope in God, which Peter reminds is revealed to us through Jesus. In Jesus, God comes close in a real tangible way. In Jesus, God exists within creation, complete with all the incredible gifts and frustrating limitations of humanity. Yes, resurrection happens, but not before experiencing a life lived. God in Jesus doesn't bypass what it is to be fully human. Jesus gets frustrated and angry, experiences happiness and delight, sadness and pain. Our trust and hope are in God because through Jesus, God lived among us as one of us to show us that we are known and loved. And for us now, as it was then, our response is love. In his letter, Peter affirms the mutual affection that his readers have for one another as they lived into their faith. And he encourages them to more. He encourages them to love one another deeply from the heart. Peter is pleased that there is kindness among these followers of Jesus, and he doesn't want this to stop, but he calls them to something deeper. Now, the word that Peter uses here for this love in action is agapeo. Agapeo, which is rooted in the word agape, which is the best word that we have to describe the unconditional love of God. And this is a love that is wildly irrational to us. Sure, we support the idea of unconditional love, and at times we may even come close to loving in this way, but on our own, by our very nature, we fall short. And this doesn't make us wrong or bad, it makes us human. But that doesn't mean that we don't have the capacity to participate in agape love. As God's creation, we have been given God's love, true unconditional love. And it doesn't rely on what we do or we don't do, and it's not withheld from us. Jesus shows us how to practice this love by recognizing the sacredness of every person and loving them simply because they are part of God's creation. This is what Jesus died for. On the cross, this agape love poured out for everyone. But participating in God's love isn't for the faint of heart. Staying in the realm of mutual affection is much more comfortable. Now, don't get me wrong, mutual affection is great. We want this, and sometimes it's all we're capable of in any given moment or relationship. Mutual affection, though, is kind of like the friend zone of agape love. It's not a bad option, but there's something more. Maybe what keeps us from opening ourselves up to even dipping our toes into the practice of God's love, agape love, is that we know that it will inevitably involve us being vulnerable. And when we're vulnerable, we can get hurt. Has anyone here seen the Apple TV show Shrinking? A few. It's incredibly heartwarming and hilarious. It's a show that follows the lives of a group of friends and colleagues, 3 of whom are therapists. Now remember, this is a TV show. The main character, Jimmy, one of the therapists, he's trying to rebuild his life after the death of his wife. As a newly single, middle-aged dad to a teenage daughter, he's trying to heal his wounds and keep on keeping on, but he's kind of stuck. In a moving conversation with his mentor and fellow therapist, Paul, Jimmy says he's covered in scars. Scars from having loved and lost. Paul's response, good, because scars are the evidence of a life well lived. Loving deeply from the heart doesn't allow us to escape pain. We open ourselves to love being rejected, ridiculed, or ignored. We hurt when those we love hurt. When separated from those we love by circumstance or death, we experience deep loss, and all of it can leave us scarred. But remember, Jesus' scars are intact in his resurrection. They remain as evidence of a life well shared, of a life well given. Yes, they are the result of unimaginable pain and hurt, and they show us the reach of God's love, the reach of God's agape, the love that we participate in every time we respond to the needs of our neighbor, stand firm in the call for peace, and love in the wake of hatred, of difference. Agape love is hard, and we're gonna experience hurt. And it's the truest gift we have been given and invited into. It's how we know that we can place our hope and trust in God, and it is where we draw the strength and the courage to know that we can navigate change and live into a deeper fullness of the life that God desires for us, for you and for me. Because learning to follow Jesus is forever wrapped up in God's love. Thanks be to God.